All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today. We're going to be talking about seduction. And specifically, we're looking at Robert Greene's book, The Art of Seduction. This book is kind of like a guide to understanding how attraction works. And not just in a romantic sense, either.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes Greene's approach so fascinating. He argues that seduction is really a form of influence, and it can be applied in all sorts of contexts, business, social dynamics, even just getting your way in everyday life.
I love that. So we're not just talking about pickup lines here. We're talking about the psychology of persuasion.
Exactly. And one of the things Greene does so well is he breaks down these different seducer types, these archetypes that have this magnetic pull on others.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, you have the Siren, for instance, just overflowing with sexuality and allure. Think of someone like Marilyn Monroe. She very carefully crafted her image to blend this kind of innocence with raw sex appeal.
Right, so it's almost like they embody a fantasy that most of us have, but maybe don't feel comfortable expressing.
Exactly, and that's a big part of what makes them so seductive. They tap into our longing for freedom, for breaking free from these societal expectations and embracing a more uninhibited way of being.
So it's not just about physical appearance, it's about the feeling they project.
Absolutely. And then you have the Rakes, driven by this relentless pursuit of pleasure. And they make that desire contagious. You know, historical figures like the Duc de Richelieu, his insatiable appetite for women, even landing him in prison, only added to his legend.
It's that bad boy energy, like their boldness makes them irresistible. What about some of the other types? I think Greene talks about 9 in total, right?
He does. And each one represents a different strategy for captivating attention, like the ideal lover. They understand the art of creating this heightened sense of romance, of beauty. Rudolph Valentino, for example. His delicate movements and smoldering gaze made him a heartthrob in the silent film era.
Yeah, he practically invented the idea of the romantic leading man.
Right. And then you have the dandies. Masters of image and ambiguity, they cultivate a striking look. But there's also this deliberate detachment, a kind of cool distance that makes them all the more intriguing.
So give me some examples.
Well, think of Beau Brummell, the ultimate Regency-era fashion icon. And then fast forward to the 20th century, you have Andy Warhol with his signature silver hair and that enigmatic persona.
It's fascinating how these types, while so different, all share this ability to create an aura of intrigue. They just draw you in. But what about the flip side? Greene also talks about anti-seducers, right? The people who just repel rather than attract.
He does, and this is where the book gets really interesting because it forces us to look inward. Anti-seducers, according to Greene, are trapped in their insecurities. They're completely oblivious to how they're coming across.
Yeah, like those people who dominate the conversation or just seem totally unaware of social cues. That I think we've all encountered a few anti-seducers in our lives.
Exactly, and Greene identifies several types. The clinging vine, desperate for attention, the moralizer, always judging, the bragger, obsessed with their accomplishments, and the bumbler, just perpetually awkward and clueless.
It's like a checklist for social self-sabotage. But what's the key difference between these seducers and anti-seducers? Is it just self-awareness?
That's a huge part of it. Anti-seducers lack the self-awareness to see how their behavior is impacting others. They're so focused on their own needs and anxieties, they just become blind to the subtle cues in social interactions.
So developing that self-awareness is crucial, not just for romantic success, but for navigating all sorts of social situations.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most valuable takeaways from Greene's book. It forces us to confront our own blind spots and to think about how we're perceived by others.
Okay, so we've got these seductive archetypes and we got these anti-seducers to avoid. But let's get to the good stuff, the actual strategies. What are some of the tactics Greene suggests for mastering this art of seduction?
Well, one of the things I find so fascinating about Greene's approach is how he connects these strategies to these deep-seated psychological needs. For example, one tactic he highlights is disarm through strategic weakness.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's about revealing vulnerabilities. You know, making yourself appear slightly fragile or in need of assistance. It taps into people's desire to help, to protect those they perceive as weaker.
So you're almost turning a perceived weakness into a strength.
Exactly. By appearing vulnerable, you disarm people's defenses. Your actions seem less calculated, less manipulative, and that sympathy can then transform into admiration, even love.
It's kind of counterintuitive. You would think that projecting strength and confidence would be more seductive.
And that certainly has its place. But Greene argues that a touch of vulnerability, especially in the early stages of seduction, can be incredibly disarming.
Interesting. So what's another tactic that Greene recommends?
Another powerful strategy is confused desire and reality. This is where things get a little bit more manipulative. It's about tapping into your target's fantasies, creating a world that caters to their deepest desires, blurring the lines between what they wish for and what's actually happening.
Wow, that's getting into some serious mind games. Can you give me a real-world example of how this works?
Well, think about Cleopatra. She seduced Mark Antony not just with her beauty, but with her ability to create this world of exotic pleasures and spectacles. She was playing on his fantasies of power, of indulgence, making it hard for him to distinguish between the illusion she created and the reality of their situation. I mean, he literally abandoned Rome for her. It's crazy to think about the power of seduction, how it can have real-world consequences.
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme example.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how some of these tactics could be used for good or for evil.
Yeah.
And speaking of evil, Greene also talks about isolate the victim, right? That sounds a bit sinister.
It does, doesn't it? But it's a classic seduction technique. The idea is you're separating your target from their usual support system, friends, family, colleagues, anyone who might offer a different perspective or challenge your influence.
Oh, so you're creating this dependence, making them rely on you for support and validation.
Exactly. Think about Casanova, the ultimate master seducer. He was so good at making his victims feel like they are the only person in the world. He'd shower them with attention, isolate them from their usual social circles, and then poof, just as quickly as he appeared, he'd vanish, leaving them heartbroken and bewildered.
Wow, it's like a magic trick.
And
The way he could manipulate people's emotions. But let's move on to something a little less manipulative, the power of indirection. I'm really curious about this one.
yeah, this is where subtlety comes in. Suggestion Greene argues that being too obvious or forceful can actually backfire. It's more about planting these seeds of thought and desire, letting them kind of bloom in the target's mind as if they were their own ideas.
So instead of demanding what you want, you're subtly suggesting it, dropping hints.
Exactly. It's about creating this atmosphere of intrigue, of unspoken desires and possibilities, and it works because it plays on the target's narcissism. You know, by mirroring their moods and tastes, making them feel understood, you lower their defenses. You create an opening for influence.
Okay, so now for something a little bit darker, Greene has a whole section on transgressive seduction. I'm a little hesitant to even go there, but I'm also incredibly curious.
I understand. This is where Greene explores the allure of the forbidden, the thrill of breaking societal norms and indulging in taboo desires. His argument is that every society imposes limits on behavior, and those limits create a fascination with what lies beyond them.
It's like that saying, the grass is always greener.
Yeah.
We're drawn to what we can't have. But how does this actually play out in seduction? Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about Lord Byron, the Romantic poet. He cultivated this aura of scandal and rebellion, the rumors surrounding him, the hints of darkness and transgression. It all just added to his allure. He embodied this romantic danger that women found irresistible.
So it's almost like he was seducing with his reputation, not just his words or actions.
Exactly. And Greene argues that all seducers tap into this longing for the forbidden, whether consciously or unconsciously. They're offering a taste of something dangerous and exciting, a glimpse into a world beyond these social conventions.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty intense ground here. I'm starting to see how these techniques can be so powerful and potentially very dangerous. But before we delve into the ethical implications, let's explore a couple more strategies from the book.
Sure. One that really stands out is the use of spiritual lures. This is where you appeal to higher ideals. You make the seduction feel transcendent, almost spiritual. It's about masking your base motivations behind a veil of deeper meaning.
So you're elevating the seduction, making it seem like it's about more than just physical attraction or personal gain.
Precisely. You're creating an illusion of depth and meaning. You're playing on your target's desire for purpose for connection. It's a really powerful way to disarm their skepticism, make them feel like they're part of something bigger.
Wow, that's pretty sophisticated. And then there's mixed pleasure with pain. This one sounds a little more straightforward and maybe a little cruel.
It can be. This tactic is all about keeping your target off balance. You alternate between kindness and cruelty, reward and punishment. You're intensifying the emotional impact by creating this roller coaster of highs and lows.
Yeah, I can see how that would be effective, but also potentially very damaging.
Absolutely. It's a tactic that should be used with extreme caution, if at all. It plays on the addictive nature of emotional highs and lows. You know, keeping the target constantly hooked, always seeking your approval.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Seductive archetypes, manipulative tactics, psychological insights. It's a lot to digest. What I'm realizing is that seduction is so much more complex than I ever imagined.
It really is. It's this multifaceted game that involves understanding human nature, recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses, and using that knowledge to create this compelling and influential persona.
But it's also clear that there are some ethical implications to consider. We can't just go around using these techniques without thinking about the potential consequences, right?
You're absolutely right. And that's actually what we're going to explore in our next segment, the darker side of seduction and the responsibility that comes with wielding this kind of power.
You know, we've spent this deep dive really exploring this idea of seduction, and we've pulled back the curtain on some pretty powerful techniques. It's clear that understanding these tactics can be really valuable, whether you're navigating a business deal or a social gathering, or even just trying to get your point across in a meeting. But I keep coming back to this question of ethics. You know, where do we draw the line between persuasion and manipulation?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And I don't think there's an easy answer. As we've seen, even seemingly harmless tactics like disarm through strategic weakness, you know, that can be used to manipulate if the intention behind it is less than honorable.
It's like that saying, power corrupts. Even the most well-intentioned person could be tempted to misuse these techniques once they understand how effective they can be.
Absolutely. That's why self-awareness is so crucial. We need to constantly check our motivations, you know, ask ourselves, am I using these techniques to genuinely connect with someone? Or am I trying to control them?
It's almost like a moral compass for seduction. But how do we actually develop that kind of self-awareness? It's not like they teach this stuff in school.
Well, it starts with being honest with yourself about your desires. Why are you drawn to this person? What are you hoping to achieve through this interaction? And are your intentions aligned with their well-being?
I think a lot of people might shy away from those kinds of questions. You know, it's almost like we're afraid to admit that we have these ulterior motives.
Yeah, that's understandable, but I think it's essential to confront those shadows within ourselves if we want to use these techniques responsibly. You know, if we're not aware of our own motivations, we're much more likely to fall into these patterns of manipulation, even if we don't consciously intend to.
So it's not just about understanding the tactics, it's about understanding ourselves.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that seduction is a two-way street. You know, it's not about conquering or manipulating someone, it's about creating a genuine connection, even if that connection is fleeting.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering about the people on the receiving end of these tactics. You know, how can we protect ourselves from being manipulated?
Yeah.
Are there any red flags we should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest warning signs is a sense of being rushed or pressured. If someone is trying to push you into making a decision before you're ready, that's a huge red flag.
So it's like they're trying to bypass your rational mind.
Yeah.
And appeal directly to your emotions.
Exactly. Healthy seduction should feel like a dance, not a forced march. Another warning sign is a lack of transparency. If someone is being evasive or withholding information, that's a cause for concern.
It's like they're hiding something. Or maybe even creating a false persona to lure you in.
Precisely. And finally, pay attention to how you feel around this person. Do you feel empowered or do you feel manipulated? Do you feel respected or do you feel used?
Yeah, your gut instincts are usually a pretty good guy. If something feels off, it probably is.
Trust your intuition. It's your best defense against manipulation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this sense of awe at the power of these techniques, but also a healthy dose of caution. It's clear that seduction is a double-edged sword.
I agree. It can be a force for good or for evil, depending on how it's wielded. But by understanding the psychology behind it, we can all become more conscious of our own behavior and more discerning in our interactions with others.
That's a powerful message. It's not about becoming a master manipulator. It's about using this knowledge to create more authentic and meaningful connections.
And to protect ourselves from those who might seek to use these techniques against us.
Well, thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration of the art of seduction. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and perhaps a little bit of wisdom along the way.